Okay, hi everyone. Um, I want to turn this week to a new kind of area that we haven't been discussing yet. It's to a contemporary issue. Uh, the field that we're going to be talking about over this week and the coming weeks is going to be something in ethics and political philosophy. And here we're going to have a case, for example, of applied ethics. In particular, it's the controversial case of abortion. And to look at abortion, we're going to look at a couple of articles. One from Judith Jarvis Thomson, a very famous article from 1971, and then another article, not directly a response to Thomson, but another article by this guy Don Marquis. Before we look at these two articles and how it is that they both try to get by one of the basic premises or one of the basic suppositions of the abortion debate, which is why they're really crucial. Before we do that, though, as we're turning to applied ethics, I want to say something about how this relates to politics and political philosophy. Because it can be very difficult, as you might imagine. People get very upset. People get angry. It's very difficult to discuss in any kind of rational or at least controlled or calm manner some of the topics that we might discuss. For example, abortion. People have very strong beliefs about whether abortion should or should not be permissible. People identify themselves on an issue like this, let's say being pro-life or pro-choice and so on. And so in talking about ethics and about political philosophy, one of the things that we want to try to do is to get below and around some of the kinds of moves that people make and that they feel that kind of rile them up in a certain way so that we can have a calmer and at least more sensible debate without necessarily leading to a definite conclusion that would absolutely 100% suggest that the other side is definitely wrong. Now, of course, the arguments are going to suggest that abortion either is or is not permissible. It's not as if they are holding back any punches, but the hope is that they do so in a way which is sensible and rational. That's the hope. Now, in order to get at that, I want to make just a couple of brief distinctions to help us see how we're getting at these underlying ideas. So, first, when we talk about politics, there are a couple of easy distinctions that we make all the time, and there are distinctions that we identify with. For example, especially in the United States, we talk about Republicans, we talk about Democrats. We sometimes talk about third parties, whether it's the Tea Party or the Libertarian Party or the Green Party or the Labor Party and so on. These two, as we know, tend to be the two-party system that we all love and hate at the same time. So we talk about Republicans and Democrats, and we also talk about conservatives and liberals. But I want to suggest real fast that even though we tend to line these up, we tend to think that Republicans just are conservatives, Democrats just are liberals, I want to suggest, briefly, that these terms, at least, these two pairs of terms, are not identical. Not completely. Here's a couple of basic reasons why that is. People who are Republicans or people who are Democrats belong to certain parties. They are political parties. And parties have certain infrastructures, they have certain structures unto themselves, they have certain people who are representatives or politicians within those parties, and they are parties that offer certain public policy proposals. And that is one way that people are, say, members of parties. We say she is a Republican or he is a Democrat and so on. But those are not exactly the same as saying somebody's a conservative or somebody's a liberal. And why is that? Well, I suspect that one reason is that conservatism conservative people or liberal people, those get at something deeper than just belonging to a particular party. They get at beliefs and values and attitudes and ways of life, and in general, kinds of worldviews which are beneath any particular party affiliation. And in starting to get toward political philosophy and ethical philosophy, we're trying to get at something which is deeper than just party affiliations, something which is closer to these kinds of ideas. But besides those ideas, we're trying to get at even more basic ideas, like the kinds of claims or the reasons that people give for positions, along with particular kinds of ideas which are specific to ethical and political philosophy, like rights, like duties, like consequences, like virtue and vice and the public good. And so, again, we're trying to get to something a little bit deeper. And there's another kind of reason to suggest this brief distinction between this pair of terms, Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal, and then these other kinds of ideas. One other basic reason to suggest a difference is that we know that whether one is conservative or liberal, and again, this is about various issues, we know that people are sometimes dissatisfied or even angry that whoever they think their party is, those people aren't expressing or actually representing the views, the beliefs, the values, the attitudes that one holds. And insofar as there is this kind of anger or dissatisfaction, or even voting differently, well, part of the reason people vote differently, along with other good reasons, explanatory reasons provided by the social sciences and other humanities. But one basic kind of explanatory reason is that people who are conservative or liberal don't see people of a specific party actually expressing the values that they hold. And so there has to be some kind of mismatch there in order to help explain why it is that people might be angry or dissatisfied or change their votes at some point. Okay, so that's just one brief distinction as we start to head into this field of ethical and political philosophy. In fact, ethical and political philosophy need not actually address any of this in particular, but I think it's helpful to just say a few things to sort of clear some space, just so we can think a little more clearly about these ideas. All right, I want to say one more thing as we're heading into the Thomson article. So Thomson wrote this in 1971. It appeared in print, and we know that this is just a few years before Roe versus Wade, that famous decision, Roe v. Wade, in 1973. But let me, using the terms that we just divided up, I want to make a kind of generalization. And of course, in the political domain, when we're talking about people's lives, generalizations can only go so far. But I'm using a kind of stereotype, and I don't mean that to connote anything negative. Just a kind of stereotype of a position. And so, I want to say this. People who are conservative tend to, not always, but tend to suggest that abortion is impermissible. But nonetheless, again, they tend to suggest that there might be three kinds of cases in which, despite the idea that abortion is generally impermissible, maybe in three cases, it should be permissible. What are those cases? Well, I take it that those cases are pregnancies due to rape, pregnancies due to incest, and finally, when there's a concern about the health or even the life of the mother. Now, if we look at these, I want to suggest something. That from Thomson's kind of argument that she's advocating, that she's advancing, this one becomes pretty important in the middle of her piece. This is important early, but if she is concerned about a particular kind of political right, namely a right to life, it's not obvious why the cases of rape, cases of incest, should be the kinds of situations in which a conservative would say that abortion is permissible. And why is that? Well, take the rape case. One thing that Thomson says is that if we're dealing with rights to life, and suppose that a fetus has a right to life because it's a person, a point that I'll emphasize in just a moment, it shouldn't particularly matter, Thomson argues, how it is that one comes into existence, or how it is that the fetus came into existence. If a fetus really is a person, and persons have a right to life, even in cases of rape, in horrific, tragic cases of rape, it seems as though even that fetus should have a right to life. And the general intuition behind this is that rights to life are inviolable. Something she's going to challenge. And so in cases of rape, sometimes conservatives like to rely upon the idea, well, the reason that abortion is permissible in cases of rape is because the woman is obviously not chosen or voluntarily engaged in this action. It's a kind of coercion, it's actual physical force that's brought against her. Which is fine and true, but it's not clear why that notion of involuntary engagement or not having made the choice to engage in sex matters if the fetus really is a person and therefore has a right to life. And so that's one thing that Thomson is going to address. So what I'm suggesting here is there's a kind of dilemma for the conservative about cases of rape. The other case involving incest is another kind of dilemma. And Thomson doesn't bring up incest, but I want to point to another dilemma here. Again, it's not obvious why cases of incest particularly matter if the fetus is a person and it has a right to life. Again, it shouldn't matter why or how this fetus came into existence. And I want to suggest that in cases of incest, there's a general intuition, I bet, that not only conservatives, but I bet other people have as well. But I think that the reason is based on a certain kind of taboo, more than anything. And if it's based on a taboo, what would that taboo be? I want to suggest that there's a certain kind of moral feeling which is beneath this, at least for some people. The feeling probably is something like moral disgust. Or just a general kind of disgust at the thought of incest. And I want to suggest briefly that that can't be a very good reason, in and of itself, for suggesting that a particular action, like abortion, should or should not be permissible. Why? Well, I want to put it in a different context. I suppose that in the years leading up to the American Civil War, there were probably plantation and slave owners who were disgusted at the idea that their slaves, and black people generally, might even be equal to them. I imagine that during the era of desegregation, people were disgusted at the idea they would have to share classrooms or lunch counters or restrooms or water fountains with people who were unlike them. And I bet that even today, in discussions of same-sex marriage, that the idea of moral disgust is behind some of the feelings and some of the positions that people take up. But it's not clear why any of those are good reasons. And so I want to pick up that thought in just one moment.